a pop-up on your screen that asks you to accept the recording. My name is Travis West. I'm chair of the Professional Development Committee for National ESP, or Epsilon Sigma Phi. I try not to use those acronyms too often in case people don't know what they mean. But so today our presentation is building community, recognizing implicit bias and microaggressions as barriers. Kayla Oberstadt will be sort of our lead presenter, and I will let her here in just a minute introduce the rest of her team members that are going to deliver the presentation. Kayla's from the University of Wisconsin-Madison. Just a little bit of housekeeping beforehand. I think Kayla is going to give you some instructions on how to submit questions. Of course, if you want to drop them in the chat box, you can. We'll also have time at the end if you want to ask them live as well. So those are all options. If you're like me, I sometimes throw mine in the chat because I'm afraid I'll forget the question because I'll really get intrigued in something else and forget that question. So I think Kayla will give you some more instructions if you want to submit them to a couple of the team members rather than everybody in the group as well. So at this point, I will turn it over to Kayla for introductions and to get us started.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Travis, and thank you to ESP for offering this opportunity to be able to present to all of you as colleagues across the country and across different areas of expertise. This crew that put together your presentation today is from our 4-H Working Group on Diversity and Inclusion, and I am pleased to introduce Ani Das from Iowa State University, Melinda Garcia from Oregon State University. Although you will not see her today, she was a pivotal contributor to this presentation. We have Srimoyee Ghosh from University of Florida, myself from University of Wisconsin, Laura Valencia from University of Florida, and Liliana Vega from University of California, Davis. So I just want to give my personal appreciation to all of these wonderful folks who I have met through our national association and be able to put on presentations like this with our shared interests and expertise. So I'd like to introduce our chair for our working group, who is Shri, if you'd like to take it away and let people know who we are.
Thank you, Kayla. Welcome and good morning, good afternoon to everyone who's joining. I am Srimoyee Ghosh, and if it's easier for you guys to remember me, Shri is what I go by. So, and I work with University of Florida, and I'm a county extension educator, 4-H educator in Polk County in Florida. So a little bit about our NA4HYDP, Diversity and Inclusion Working Group. The first thing is you do not have to be a 4-H educator to be a part of that group. And some of our goals. So as a member of the working group, you will have the opportunity to increase awareness of the DEI principles and the best practices, engage with extension educators across the country to share knowledge and resources, and create a safe space for learning, healing, and growth. The committee meets every second Friday of the month for 2 hours, where we begin with connection before content, followed by an educational presentation, and then open share time. It's a great opportunity to make a difference and to get your work in the forefront while we have fun and lots of bonding time. With that, I encourage all of you to look into joining our working group. And whether you want to just attend one meeting without any commitment of getting to a series of meetings, you are more than welcome to do that. You can reach out either to myself or Alicia Targonsky. She is the co-chair, and I will put our information in the chat box for you guys to reach out. With that, I'm going to hand it back to Kayla, and we can get started with our presentation. Thank you and welcome again.
Thank you, Shri. So to get us started, I wanted to share our objectives, just so everyone who is registered for this session knows where we're starting and where we are going at the end of this hour. And we're going to kick things off with Brave Spaces. This team of professionals always finds it very fitting and important to be able to set a standard of expectations of why we do this work, recognize that it can be hard, but know that we have some joint expectations and sharing that we do to get started, while also encouraging you to be yourselves. We'll dive into our content. We're looking at definitions on implicit bias, microaggressions, and intersectionality today. And then finally, taking action. And where do we go from here, including ways to intervene or disarm, as well as standing up and responding when you see something that requires some attention. So that's where we're at. And over the next 50 minutes, we will thank you for taking this journey with us as you hear from all of our committee members presenting today.
Hello, I'm Liliana Vega with the University of California, and I'll be talking to you all about brave spaces today. So brave spaces is really the notion of understanding that the conversations around diversity, equity, and inclusion and justice are just difficult conversations to have to begin with. And so we invite everybody to kind of step into that space and be courageous to have these conversations, because the only way that we can create more inclusive work environments as well as programs in cooperative extension is to be willing to have those honest conversations about which ways our programs are inclusive and in which ways our programs are not, which means we have to be willing to have those tough conversations. So we do recognize that there's emotions and discomfort that will come, whether you're on the receiving end of microaggressions or whether you may be someone who doesn't realize that you are contributing to microaggressions. And so, it's really important to be able to discuss important issues that may trigger emotional trauma as a result. So it could be guilt, and it could also be from trauma from having, being on the receiving end. We ask that people be respectful in sharing. And by that, we mean step up if you tend to be one of those people that steps back. And if you tend to step up all the time, be one of those folks that are willing to take a step back so that other people can contribute to the conversation. And that we're here to really gain some understanding and some knowledge so that we can move forward in extension on being a more inclusive environment. And that we share our personal experiences, speak from an I standpoint, and that we're not representing any group of people, but rather your own perspective.
Yes, thank you. And in an effort to create this shared and brave space, I do recognize if you have questions or comments that you'd like to remain anonymous, please send a private chat to myself or to Shri, and we will facilitate that on your behalf without mentioning any names or where you are from.
And then the other thing that we just really want to talk to you all about is group agreements. So again, speak from your own experiences, your own perspectives, and be willing to be open and willing to learn. So we just ask that you please come open-minded into this space so that you're able to learn, and that you are able to listen generously and respectfully. Again, please share the space, and willing to challenge and disrupt racist patterns, both by activities, discussions, and by other participants, because we're all socialized in a racist society. So it's really important to just acknowledge that, and really important to be willing to disrupt that, more importantly. And that we respect the confidentiality of information and stories shared here. So you can take the lesson that is learned today, but we ask you to not share who shared that and the specifics of that. Just take the lesson, but the story and the personal shared moments stay with that person. Thank you. And I'll go ahead and turn it over to Ani.
Hi, I'm Ani, and I used to work for 4-H and Extension at Iowa State, and now I work as the Diversity, Equity, Inclusion Strategist for the College of Design. And I'm so happy to be here with this group, and let's move on to the presentation. And so my part is like just defining some concepts over here, and if you have questions, please do ask and raise questions, and Kayla and Shri will pass that on to me. Thank you. I'm sure like you all have heard of implicit bias, and there are many definitions that are connected with implicit bias, and some also talk about it as unconscious bias. So, they are kind of used interchangeably, but, in some ways they are similar, but I kind of don't like to use that it's unconscious. It is there within us, It is somewhere installed within us, even though it's unconscious, but how we manage that is up to us. So that's the reason I'm saying that I would like to use the word implicit, and I think our group also agreed on that. So that's the reason we use the term implicit bias. Implicit bias refers to the automatic and unconscious stereotypes that drive people to behave and make decisions in certain way. Biases include implicit biases are pervasive across people and across institutions. So we've seen biases in all forms of institutions, be it like media, be it educational institutions, be it transportation. In all forms of institution, you will come to notice, if you are aware of it, you will come to notice that there exists some form of bias, and some of them are used in forms that become discrimination. So it's very important to be aware of our biases before we act on it, even if it's unconscious. Now let's, the next slide, I'll be talking on some of the root causes of implicit bias. I like the work of McGee in this a lot, because she talks about like how our tendency to make one example and story of all. So for example, like we'll see that all Indian people are vegetarian. Oh, that's not true. Most Indian people are not vegetarian. We have a variety of non-vegetarian cuisine, which is very delicious, very tasty. I may not choose to eat it, but we do. So we kind of make the story generalized that, okay, you know one person who is vegetarian, and then you think that all Indians are vegetarian. All Indians are Hindus. I'm taking a dig on Indians because I'm Indian. I can do that. Sorry. But we generalize our experience with one person and what we see in media to all people of the same racial group. So that's one of the root cause, how it comes. We kind of associate experience and people to be and generalize it. Then we create psychological shortcuts or unconscious sticky schemas from one experience. So in our brain, it is a schema that we associate, like we kind of have like, you know, when we are working on something, we put sticky marks on pages as we are reading a book. The same way we learn of our experience, and that speaks to us, and we put a sticky mark on it saying that, oh, that's how it is. That's how these people behave. That's how these people are. So that schema or the stereotype of that person sticks with us, and we are unwilling to think otherwise. So again, we are socialized into these implicit bias. And one thing is very important to remember, that we all have implicit biases, and that being self-aware of our own biases and understanding how to manage them has a huge impact when we are interacting with others who may not look like us, who may not feel like us, who may not love like us, or who may not, you know, pray like us. So it's very important that we become aware of our own biases, and we see how we extend that in our interpersonal relationship with others. Next slide, please. So now I'm going to talk to you all about microaggression, because these two concepts are very much related to each other. When implicit biases are visible, there is an act of microaggression. So just remember that when you make implicit biases visible, that's when you are knowingly or unknowingly, you are being a microaggressor. So this concept was first kind of coined or conceptualized by the psychiatrist Chester Pierce. And he talked about the conception of subtle and stunning daily racial offenses or microaggressions that remain silent. Even 50 years prior to his most important work that came out in 1970, a chapter on offensive mechanism, this concept still remains very strong with us. It's a seminal work where he extends the concept and introduces the term, but this work came out from his work in the therapeutic process, where he saw that how the deleterious effects of these therapists impacted negatively to the patients who came to the office to see the therapist. And so that had a negative impact on these patients' health and well-being, because the bias or the aggression that these therapists had, even though they said that we are not biased, but then it had an impact. So the work of peers was elaborated in many different ways, but critical race theory took a big stab on it, and specifically the works of Youre and Solzhenitsyn, and like there are many others, like, who took on their work and they elaborated on it. So based on critical race theory, some verbal and non-verbal assaults directed towards people of color often carried out in subtle, automatic, or unconscious forms. And these assaults are layered based on race and intersections with gender, class, sexuality, language, immigration status, phenotypes, accent, and surname. And these assaults are cumulative, which means they are in a continuous process that take on psychological and physiological toll on people of color. So I'm going on saying people of color or racism, because this whole idea came out from the expressions that the Black people experienced. So his work came out of the experiences of Black people, and then now it is being used with other people or other marginalized communities. So Pierce's seminal work, the construct of microaggression, laid great foundation for Su and his colleagues' work in 2007. Gerald Su is considered a pioneer in microaggression. They define racial microaggression as subtle, daily, and unintentional slights committed against members of racialized groups. So again, he added the part that, even the unintended, that is part of microaggression. And his phenomena is similar to the concepts like everyday racism, things that you experience every day, even though you say it or don't say it, you experience it, and is characterized by small instances of discrimination that are routine and chronic. For example, identified any sudden, stunning, dispiriting transaction that deeply affect people of color. Something someone says or does that makes you feel diminished, offended, threatened, stereotyped, discounted, or attacked. So despite an apparent overall decline in the overtly offensive racist actions, but these aggressive tendencies in offenders are seen in various forms. And these are some of the forms that are often discussed in research or in literature. It's called microassault. Microassault are the deliberate and the intentional slights or insults that are meant to hurt the intended victim through name calling, through avoidant behavior, or purposeful discrimination actions. Intentional microassaults would be abusive language. When you see people sometimes clutching their purse if they see a person of color in an elevator, those are all examples of microassault. For example, the jokes to degrade people with different racial, ethnic, and gender identities. My daughter talked to me about how in their class, the student just started talking randomly to a student that, oh, he's so gay, he's so gay. Then my daughter was asking, do you even know that what's the meaning of gay? And do you even know that if that person told you that they were gay? So if you do not know why you are doing this, but then, you just are too serious, they told her. But then that's that. I told her that is a form of microaggression that they're doing towards that person who probably does not even know the meaning of gay. And this happened to a fourth grader. So I feel that it is very pervasive. This action or this kind of assault is very pervasive. Microinvalidation is someone attempts to discredit or minimize the experience of a person who is underrepresented. For instance, as an Asian, if I express that, I felt disrespected when I already filled in the application that I'm vegetarian in a survey that they ask, do you have any dietary requirements? And I fill in that I'm vegetarian. And why do you ask me if you are not going to support me with the food that I need? So most of the times I will come out of conferences basically not eating anything because I'm vegetarian and they don't have anything for me. But then most of the time my colleagues will tell me that, oh, they were not trying. There's so many people coming to the conference. They cannot take into care of everybody's needs. And they weren't, or start talking about their own experiences to contradict what I shared with them, that I am hungry. So that is a form of micro-invalidation. I'm giving a very simple example, but it is a form of micro-invalidation that, I am experiencing something, and then you're like, no, that's not a big deal. It's not something. The other form is micro-insult. Micro-insults are the rude, insensitive comments that subtly disrespect a racial heritage or their identity of a person. This could be assuming that someone is not smart just based on their appearances, or implying that certain people do not hold proper morals because whom do they choose to pray, or how do they dress up, or who they choose to love. This also includes assuming someone won't understand a new process at work because English is not their first language. We often experience that if you come from another country, people will ask you, how do you speak English so well? So can you read and write in English really well? Yeah, I have a PhD from this country, but yeah, I do understand English. I can read and write in English. So these creates a feeling that a person does not belong to that setting. So Sue's work is later, Sue's, like, as I said, is like a pioneer in microaggression, and he later expanded his research to how microaggressions affect religious groups, gender identities, and those who are living with disability and LGBT community. Further, the frequency and impact of microaggression may increase with the intersectionality of gender, sexual orientation, and additional stigmatized identity. And I think, the continuous discussion on intersectionality that my friend will share with you kind of connect to these topics also. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. My name is Laura Valencia. I'm a 4-H agent from the University of Florida. I'm in Osceola County. And if you have the ability to give me a thumbs up, how many of you have heard of the term intersectionality? And the reason that I ask this is because this term or concept gained popularity in the last few years, informing the work of activists engaged in the fight for equity. Intersectionality is, in short, a framework for understanding oppression. It was originally introduced by American lawyer, scholar, and activist Kimberly Crenshaw. And actually, she introduced this term in 1989, but it really took on in 2015, and it was used to explain, again, the varying layers of oppression. According to the Access to Equity and Belonging website, they define intersectionality as the notion that identities such as gender, race, class, and others can be examined in isolation from one another. They interact and intersect in individual life, in society, in social systems, and are mutually constitutive. One of the things that I want to point out, and when you look at the first picture on intersectionality, so a lot of people only focus on race, class, and gender. However, there are so many dimensions of diversity, as you can see on the other picture. In other words, it describes the ways in which systems of inequality based on gender, it could be in race, class, it could be also on gender identity, class, language, religion, ability, and many others. When it comes to intersectionality, I want to leave you with this thought. To better understand an individual and work effectively with them, we must understand all the identities to make up that person. Next slide. Liliana.
Thank you, Laura. Okay, so we've been talking about a little bit about microaggressions and the different layers in which microaggressions really get influenced and how they're socialized. So we're going to do an activity. In the chat box, you'll see the link to the activity to be able to participate. We're going to go to a poll everywhere. It is a free version, so I'm just going to say the first 25 responses are what's going to populate. If you don't see your response there and you really want to get it out there, you may also use the chat box, but it is anonymous on the poll everywhere. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen as I activate this. And then what we're going to do now is really look at the microaggressions and then just really ask you all to help contribute to understanding what the hidden message is behind the microaggression that's being stated. Because that's really the whole point about microaggressions, is for people to really understand the impact that it has on the individual, regardless of whether the intent was well-meaning or not, because we know that sometimes it's very direct discriminatory remarks, and other times it's a little bit, it is sometimes, again, because of implicit bias, well-meaning but very harmful. So this first one is, where are you from? No, really, where are you from? So what is the hidden message here? When this statement is said to somebody, usually to a person of color, like, where are you from? No, really, where are you from? What is the hidden message? So I know some of y'all are putting the state you're from, but what's the hidden message here that we're really saying? Like, what's the harm in this? What messages are we communicating to that person when they tell us, I am from Georgia or Kansas or Iowa, and they're like, no, but where are you really from? Yeah, so we're definitely seeing that, like, you're not from here, right? Like, yeah, I don't think you belong. You're not from here, so you must be from somewhere else. That you're really not from here, you don't belong. Implicit that the person does not belong here. You might answer like Colorado now, originally from Western New York, but again, this isn't about like where you really are from. This is about like when somebody tells you that, what are they trying to say? Like, you don't look like us, you don't sound like us. You may be excited to meet someone different than you, but again, this is a microaggression. So the intent here, the hidden message is you are definitely pointing out to that person, you're different from me. And I don't consider you like me. So just, yeah, you're not American. You're not from the United States, because color doesn't resonate. Yeah, so those are some like examples of some hidden messages behind that microaggression statement. So we'll go to another one just to practice a little bit more about like, why are they so harmful, particularly if you're on the receiving end of that microaggression. So this next one is, you must play sports. What sports do you play? And of course, you're saying this to an African-American individual. So what's the damage here? What's the hidden message behind saying that to somebody who's of African-American or Black descent and does not play sports? But you're forcing them to tell you what sport they play. Yeah, assumption that all African Americans are athletic. You're assuming all Africans play basketball. Yeah, don't worry if you didn't get to submit your last answer. We're going to move along. Sorry about that. Yeah, your value is based on physical ability, right? Not an intellect. That's what they're good for. That's what they're here for. We're definitely lumping people together, right? So if you're 6'4", and you don't play basketball, what are you like? You're making them feel bad about it. There's only one role they can play. Their role is their importance is based on their physical ability and ability to play sports, and that's their only strength, and that sports is more important than who they are as a person. That's a good one. So these are some great examples of, again, the hidden message behind the microaggression statement, whether you meant that in a good way or a bad way to say, hey, you must play sports, and they don't play sports, like, it's still very hurtful to be able to have to constantly have to be made the assumption of you is behind sports and your physical ability, especially if there's something you can't see as far as that may be inhibiting their physical ability. Okay, we'll go to the next one. You're really pretty for a dark girl's fur. And this is, you're saying this to somebody like, you're really pretty for being dark, right? So what's the assumption here? What's the hidden message that we're telling that person who is of darker skin, that, she's pretty for being dark skin? Yeah, that beauty is based on skin tone. People of color are not generally typically pretty. and that you're really not pretty. Yeah. All dark-skinned girls are not necessarily pretty. We're basing definitely value on skin color associated with beauty. And if y'all haven't paid attention, look at magazines, look at media, and tell us how we like really look at like who are we saying is pretty based on who we're allowing to be in those mediums. So I highly suggest, if you haven't done so, to really critically analyze news coverage and media, TV, movies, magazines, to look at like who we do tend to put up as pretty. So if you are somebody who's darker skin, we're really sending that message that darker skin isn't attractive, isn't pretty, and that you have to be a fair skin type in order to be understood as beautiful. So that's the harm of that. If you, you know, you're not supposed to be, you're the exception. Okay, what about when we say those kids? I'm gonna clear these. I'm gonna go ahead and clear them and we'll start again. When we say those kids, what's the hidden message there? So somebody's asking okay, somebody's asking in what context. So 4-H, you know, let's say we have a 4-H educator working with a group of marginalized youth, and it's like those kids are not 4-Hers. Those kids that are doing that other program over there, like what are we saying about those kids? And did this stop working? Because it looks like I'm not hearing responses here. See if I can activate it again.
We do have some responses in the chat box, things such as they are bad kids or they did something wrong, lumping a group with a negative connotation.
Yeah.
They aren't our kids.
And I think people are having issues, Liliana, submitting for that. There you go.
Okay, there we go. Okay, I got, yeah, insulting, disrespectful, kids are not all good kids, lumping groups with a negative connotation. Those are a different group of kids. You're also saying different from our kids. Some don't belong and some don't. So some belong and some don't is definitely what we're saying. The children are perceived less than, right? We hear this actually quite a bit. This is actually up here on purpose because we actually hear this in the 4-H world way too often. I think every single one of us probably can honestly say we've heard this comment on not just one occasion, but on multiple occasions, where it's like those kids aren't valued and aren't respected. And like, why are we wasting our time on them is really the hidden message that we get behind those kids. Because we're really saying they don't belong in our program, and only certain types of kids belong in our program. So yes, they're definitely perceived less than, out of the normal, not the right kids. And essentially we're saying they don't belong in our program. So we're gonna do one more and then I'm gonna pass it back over to my colleagues. Just to get a little bit more of like what it is that we're talking about. So like someone sees a person of color walking towards them and they cross the street to avoid that person of color. Typically, usually a Black person, this is when it highly occurs. So what is the hidden message that we're saying there? And this is an example of like, it's not always a statement, sometimes it's an action. So I threw this one up there just to get everybody to really understand that sometimes it's an action in which a microaggression can happen. So somebody said fright, but why that fright? Like, what have we been socialized to believe that white people are safe and people who are of color are not, right? Like, where is that coming from? To be able to know that at that point in time you need to cross. So like you're saying you're afraid that they're not trustworthy, that they will harm you, that people of color are dangerous, yet other folks who are light-skinned or not, you are really socializing danger with people of color. and not necessarily with people who are not. So that's the hidden message behind that. And again, if you are somebody who does that, it's really like, what's the bias behind what we've been socialized to believe that Black people or people of color, Latinos, or other individuals are dangerous, and therefore I can't be near them. And the perception that they're violent and act aggressively versus white people, like, you know, aren't we like all capable of different things at different times? And like what like the really we're telling people of color every time you cross the street from them, even like that they're dangerous and you don't want to come near them, and therefore they're socialized to believe like I'm not a, you know, people don't think I'm a good person, right? Because every time they see me, they like will walk away from me. And so just really important to be able to do that. Yeah, so thank you for sharing a personal experience, Jeff, about buying a vehicle one time and a salesperson turned to your husband who's Hispanic and asked how bad his credit is. I will tell you that is not an insular, that's not an insular occasion. I have had that happen on multiple occasions with my family and with my friends. In fact, one of my cousins went to go buy a truck and had cash to be able to buy the truck. And they were like, oh, you know, I don't think you can afford this one. Let me show you these other trucks. And then he's like, excuse me? And then he's like, let me talk to your manager. And then he's like, and by the way, I'm not buying a truck here. You know, I was like ready to buy on the spot. He literally went, when he found his truck, went back to the car like salesman person and was like, I found a better truck anyways. And showed off the new truck that he purchased at a different car lot. Because again, these microaggressions, unfortunately, as we want to think that they're insular and they only happen to that person, they're actually very common. And so it's really important to understand how harmful microaggressions are and how common they are. And then when you repeatedly get them, I'm going to talk about, you know, it's 1,000 cuts by a million paper cuts. You know, like it's death by a million paper cuts. That's really what it is, because you get, you know, if y'all know paper cuts, they hurt. But imagine having a million of them layered and layered and layered on top of each other. That's why they're so impactful. And I'm going to turn it over to, I believe this is Ani, to really talk, or is it Laura? I'm sorry. It's Laura, about the intent versus impact and why this is important to pay particular attention to.
Thank you, Liliana, and thank you for mentioning the paper cut analogy. So have you ever found yourself saying, well, that's not what I meant, or I didn't mean it like that, so I don't understand why you're so upset? Well, you're not alone. Everyone tends to measure their responses based on their own interpretation of a situation in which unintentional harm is bound to happen. And we are not exempt of accidental ouch, how I like to call them. However, the problem is when you make it an everyday behavior. So intent is the idea or desire behind an action, is what you had in mind or what you were hoping to achieve with a particular way of acting. In the other hand, impact is the effect of that action has on that person or in a community that you might be working on. Although you might desire a specific outcome, that outcome that occurred might not be the one that you had in mind or you have intended. So the difference between the two, intent refers to what you thought you were doing or saying, and the impact refers how that action was perceived by the other person. And I want to talk about an experience that I had when I started working at a county. I was looking to move into that county, and I have a picture of my family. And they asked me, the volunteers asked me what area in the county I was looking for. And I mentioned the area of the county that I wanted to move, that I was looking. And their response was, oh, you shouldn't move over there because that's where the Black live. That's where they all are. my first reaction was not very good. And my family, my mom identified as Afro-Latina. So for me, this is why it's so important to understand how the different intersections of identity. Like for me, I have so many identities. They intersect, like I was mentioning before. So how you close that impact, how you close that gap between intent and impact, restrain your judgment, think twice before you actually say something, communicate openly, and also create accountability. If you learn that you had hurt someone else's feelings, if you find yourself responding this, I didn't mean it like that, shift your perspective to the person you offended. And going back to my reaction, I actually told them and showed them the picture of my family. It was a learning experience. Everything that I've been through, I always make it a learning opportunity for those that do not know me. So when you focus on the impact you have on others, demonstrate your willingness to take stock on your actions and how they affect me and might affect my family. I encourage you, it encourages when you take actions in what you have offended that person, in creating a sense of belonging, which in turn reduces stress and increases emotional well-being and performance in those around you. Again, you can only control the intent, but not the impact. So let's be aware of what we want to say. And I'm going to have Liliana.
Thank you, Laura. Okay, so go ahead and go to the next slide. And I know somebody was asking in the chat box about how to respond to microaggressions or how do we stop. So we'll go ahead and talk about that. And then while we're waiting for the next slide to advance, I'm thinking Kayla must have some technical difficulties. I do want to throw out, Ani is going to throw in the chat box a link to be able to take the implicit bias that Harvard actually has several implicit bias tests you can take based on different categories. And so Ani's going to put that in the link just so you have that as a resource to be able to take that, because we all hold implicit biases. And that's one way to kind of double check where we hold our implicit biases. And you can take one on different things. I, for example, have taken one on the colorism. I've been socialized to believe that fair skin is pretty by the media that we take in, but also because of my mom. Mom has always been like, stay out of the sun, you're gonna get dark, stay out of the sun, you're gonna get dark. And different things like that have socialized me on the colorism. And as much as I feel like I have, moved away from that, and I have to constantly push back, but every time my mom says that, I'm constantly like, I love my beautiful brown skin. It's still been socialized at such a deep level that it's good to see, like, yeah, like that's an implicit bias I need to check in myself, for example. Now we're going to talk about taking action. So, one thing is being aware of your own implicit biases, right? Because then you can know how to not only intervene and disarm your own microaggression statements, but also in other individuals too. So, learn how to intervene and disarm microaggressions. If you haven't taken the bystanders training, that's a good other training that we don't have time to get into, but of 5 different ways to disarm and intervene. Be willing to have those courageous conversations about, hey, like when you said that, even if it wasn't directed at you, ideally, you're the one who's able to say, hey, I took offense to that. I don't know if you understood. This is what I understood when you said that. Again, it doesn't matter what the intent was, the impact on the individuals and those that heard it. That's the conversation that needs to be had. So being willing to have those courageous conversations by identifying the action, what was said or done, promoting equity, what should have occurred, and then being willing to listen. And if you take that bystander training, you also know that sometimes a courageous conversation happens with the aggressor, but sometimes a courageous conversation happens with the person who received it by checking in with them and seeing how they're doing and then, you know, asking how they would like you to respond the next time that that occurs, because unfortunately, more than likely, microaggressions will occur again on that individual. So, and then again, learning how to stand up and respond. Again, highly recommend that bystander training because it really talks about like intervening as far as like it disrupting, for example, like especially if it's very obvious discriminatory remarks that are being said, you know, like accidentally dropping a water bottle as a way to intervene, or asking a question that's completely unrelated to disrupt the conversation, or again, just head on saying, hey, like, I really found that offensive. Like, I found it offensive. Could we please, you know, talk, like, let's talk about this later. And willingness to share and mind your manners and your language. And then again, if you're the person who's that's getting told to, like, instead of being like, I didn't mean to do that, or that's not what I meant, or I was trying to say a compliment, like taking a moment to be like, okay, what was the hidden message behind what I just said? What implicit bias led to that action or statement? And then how do I disrupt that for me to make sure that I don't do that again, right? And disrupt those implicit biases that I may hold that I was previously unaware until somebody just made me aware. So those are some examples of some taking action. And then I welcome any of my other colleagues to share other examples, but there's, again, this can be a whole other training in of itself, but we wanted to at least share some strategies for how to take action and how to intervene with microaggressions. And it's a lot of it's also self-reflection if you happen to be one that has some implicit biases that you were unaware of, that you were socialized. Yeah, you can ask them to further explain what they mean and ask them for their source of information. You can also ask them to really critically analyze where that's coming from. And are they, you know, stereotyping or making a general statement about a group of people that they don't really have valid information from, because they don't know enough people from that group of individuals to really know whether that's a true statement or not. And again, even though the microaggression might seem positive, it's really important to recognize that the impact and intent may still be very negative as well.
Can I give one example of positive microaggression that can have a negative? So I don't know how many of you know that the Indian community is considered, or the Asian community rather, is considered the model minority, which means they're very good in science, technology, mathematics, they stay out of trouble and all that, yada, yada. But then you know that like, because they see the media image, like, you know, who is the CEO of Google, who is the CEO of Microsoft, all those big images, and they assume all of these Indian people are good in. So what happens, the negative part of it is that when kids go to classroom, they have other interests also, right? So teachers oftentimes will promote them in math or science if they are Indian or Asian, and they will say that, oh, when it comes to English or writing or things like that, you may not be good enough because first of all, you don't look white, you don't know that you can speak the right language. So maybe you're not good in those things. So promoting one aspect of their identity is like promoting their single story. Thank you.
And I can personally attest to it. When I came to, I went to school in Colorado State and I came from India in 2014. Of course, all of my friends, they were mostly in computer science, engineering, and all of those degrees. And I was the only person from an Indian background with an agriculture, who was pursuing an agriculture degree. And not one person knew or assumed. Every person who met me always assumed that I was either computer sciences or engineering, given that the background I was from. So
yeah, so it's very harmful in that it doesn't allow folks to really explore the things that they really are passionate about and enjoy to do. And so even though it's well-intentioned, you're saying like, you must fit this box. If you don't fit this box, something's wrong. And that's why even well-intentioned, positive stereotypes are actually harmful when you don't fit that box. But you're asking in the chat box, I have a question about what if you're the guilty party and you found that you have said something that you realize is a microaggression after you said it. What's the appropriate way to do that? Well, appropriate way to really do that is apologize, to say, you know, I just realized what I said. might have been well-intentioned on my part, but but could be very harmful. So I just want to apologize for what I just said. Or if you realize it later, have a conversation with that person and just acknowledge it, or have a conversation with somebody about what you could do to intervene from that happening again, so that you're not, again, doing something harmful to another person, because again, you're probably not the only person who said something negative to that person that day. And they probably have also had many microaggression statements already and already have a lot of paper cuts. And so you don't need to layer another one on. And so just really taking the time to think about where did that come from, so that I don't perpetuate stereotypes and racism and discriminatory remarks in the future. But yes, I definitely would apologize if you have interactions with them again, and definitely take some self-reflection.
I also think that, do not reiterate the example in your next meeting and your next meeting and your next meeting, that something like this happened when you're introducing them to another person. Don't do that, because that will again go through the paper cuts that Liliana was talking about. And also do not expect that they will educate you about their negative experience. You need to take that experience, just like how Shri has put all of those in the chat, the pointers. That's your own self-education and awareness that you need to change. Don't expect them to come up and explain to you what it is and why they felt bad and things like that.
Yeah, thank you, Ani. So definitely don't expect for them to explain to you how they felt, because they may not feel comfortable explaining it to you because it could be very harmful. So it is up to you to go do your own self journey to figure out where is that coming from? How do you break that? And there is a lot of resources out there. So again, I've mentioned the bystanders training as a whole nother training in itself, which thank you, Cherie, for putting that in the chat box. But if you find yourself being part of that, like take more trainings, be more involved, because this is not a one-time journey. This is an ongoing journey of disrupting racist patterns, and that's what the term anti-racist is, right? It's about disrupting the racist patterns in which we're socialized to behave. And so we have to disrupt that. So if you notice it, hey, kudos to you for noticing it. Now disrupt it for future purposes.
Yes, and I wanted to speak to that word intervention, intervening or disarming, and especially disruption. Is if you are in a space where something like this is said or done, that you need to recognize by not doing anything might give an assumption that you agree with it. And while that might be really hard because you don't know in the moment what to say or do, if you recognize that somebody might have been, in this case, a victim, take a chance to check in with that person later and recognize, I wasn't sure what to say in the moment. And as Ani said, it's not their responsibility to explain to you why it was hurtful, but perhaps by recognizing, said, I felt uncomfortable. I can't imagine what that was like for you. I want to do better next time. What suggestions do you have for somebody like me? That's the only way that any of us can learn, is to recognize where we fall short. And some of those resources that Shri added, I think, are very important. So just that word of intervening or disrupting, if you are in the space to say something, go for it, because sometimes the silence assumes your agreement. And that's not at all what you intended either, but that intent does not always equal the impact. So I thank my colleagues for sharing their personal examples, and thank those of you in the chat box who are also sharing.
Yeah, so as Barb actually said, Barbara, thank you for sharing in the chat box. You accept the fact that you made the statement, you acknowledge the impact on others and how it have hurt, and you would apologize when possible, and you would adjust, more importantly, to do better next time. And again, I'm going to reiterate what Kayla said, not doing anything socializes racist patterns, right? The not speaking up socializes racist patterns. And it allows us to say this is okay in our spaces. And therefore, that means whatever group was the target of that microaggression is not welcome. And if you're wondering why they don't show back up, that's because you have said that this is okay. It's okay to be racist. It's okay to be discriminatory. It's okay to offend people in these spaces. And so other groups of individuals may not show up because you have said that it's okay for them to not be there because you're valuing one group of people over another group.
And this has been such robust conversation and sharing in the chat. And I thank you all for participating as we come to our final moments here to close. Wanted to share our resources that are available. You will be all receiving the slide deck, and you'll be able to copy and paste any of these links for some of the great citations that our colleagues have shared. So just know that'll be coming your way in an email from Travis, likely next week. And to summarize, I would love for you in the moment, if you could put something in the chat box that you are going to take away from our presentation today. It gives us a little bit of in the moment evaluation of reaching the objectives that we sought to share today, of building a safe space, a brave space, allowing the definitions to be shared, and then also recognizing intent versus impact, as well as the final pieces of taking action. So whatever comes to mind right away, if someone were to ask you, what did you do today on that webinar over your lunch period? What is that nugget of wisdom that you have? Go ahead and share that in the chat box right now. We'd really appreciate it. And in summary, and it was mentioned before, we can't cover all of it in 1 hour. And this simply is not a one and done presentation. It's just the start. So thank you for taking that starting step with us. And to help continue what you've learned or wanting to share with colleagues, please reach out to us. We'd be happy to offer a Zoom of this nature or specifically to a certain topic, microaggressions, disarming, intersectionality, and so on, to your extension group or cohort. Here is our contact information. And we really appreciate the time that you have spent with us today. Please know that you are recognized for coming into this space, and your hour of time is valued, and that does not go unnoticed by us. For now, the recording will end so we can thank everybody, but if you'd like